My mother begged for her life, yet he showed no remorse.
As far as Satan is concerned, I believe in a malevolent being. His description eludes me, but I have felt powers that are evil.
Richard Ramirez was one of the most notorious serial killers. His horrific crimes were characterized by exceptionally cruel and depraved torture methods that defied comprehension. In one particularly disturbing instance, Ramirez brutally murdered a victim while she lay asleep, stomping her to death with unrelenting force, and another victim was tortured by electrocution using live wire. In this exploration of the darkest corners of human behavior, we delve into 10 of the most savage and brutal methods employed by serial killers throughout history. His horrific crimes were characterized by exceptionally cruel and depraved torture methods that defied comprehension. In one particularly disturbing instance, Ramirez brutally murdered a victim while she lay asleep, stomping her to death with unrelenting force, and another victim was tortured by electrocution using live wire. In this exploration of the darkest corners of human behavior, we delve into 10 of the most savage and brutal methods employed by serial killers throughout history.
Tonight, an Oklahoma sheriff says Kansas serial killer known as BTK is the prime suspect in a 1976 cold case. The sheriff of Osage County, Oklahoma, believes Dennis Rader is involved in the disappearance of 16-year-old Cynthia Kinney.
Dennis Rader, the notorious criminal who gained infamy under the moniker BTK Killer, a chilling acronym derived from the phrase bind, torture, and ultimately kill, remains a figure of abject horror that America would undoubtedly prefer to erase from its collective memory. His reign of terror, a period of sustained violence and dread, stretched across 3 long decades, spanning from 1974 to 1991, leaving an indelible scar on the nation's psyche. Over this protracted period, he committed a series of brutal murders, claiming the lives of 10 innocent individuals in Wichita, Kansas, a community forever marked by his heinous acts. The stark contrast between his outwardly ordinary appearance, that of a typical family man and a respected church leader, and the monstrous nature of his crimes, only served to amplify the shock and disbelief that reverberated throughout the community and beyond when the truth finally came to light. The unveiling of his true identity sent shockwaves through those who knew him. Born in 1945, Rader spent his formative years in Kansas, where he cultivated a seemingly normal existence, successfully masking the darkness that lurked within. To all outward appearances, he led a life that was remarkably unremarkable, blending seamlessly into the fabric of his community. However, beneath the veneer of normalcy, during his youth, a disturbing undercurrent of violence began to emerge. As a young man, Rader harbored deeply disturbing fantasies, his thoughts consumed by visions of binding, torturing, and ultimately taking the lives of others. Following a period of service in the Air Force, a seemingly ordinary chapter in his life, Rader entered into marriage and established roots in Wichita. Further solidifying his facade of normalcy, he secured a succession of unremarkable jobs, each seemingly mundane in nature, including a period employed as a compliance officer, a position ironically charged with upholding the law. His professional duties entailed enforcing local codes and regulations, a role that, in a perverse twist, appeared to provide a twisted sense of fulfillment, satisfying his deeply ingrained desire for control and dominance over others. This disturbing theme of control would become a defining characteristic of his gruesome killings. A chilling hallmark of his criminal behavior, the BTK murders commenced in 1974, initiating a reign of terror that would grip the community for years to come. Beginning with the horrific slaying of 4 members of the Otero family, a tragedy that would forever mark the beginning of his killing spree. Rader forcibly entered their residence, violating the sanctity of their home, before subjecting them to a horrifying ordeal, binding, meticulously torturing, and ultimately extinguishing their lives. This meticulously planned and executed act of violence established what would become his signature modus operandi, a chilling ritual of binding his victims, inflicting both physical and psychological torment upon them, culminating in their agonizing deaths. His methods were as cruel as they were calculated, often employing a plastic bag to suffocate his victims, or resorting to other equally brutal means. Rader derived a perverse satisfaction from the terror and utter helplessness he inflicted upon those who fell prey to his depravity. He reveled in their fear, adding a layer of psychological torment to his already horrific crimes. He preyed upon their vulnerability, in a chilling testament to his deeply disturbed psyche. Rader's motivations extended beyond the act of killing itself. He harbored a profound craving for recognition, a desire to be acknowledged for his heinous deeds, driven by an insatiable ego. He engaged in a campaign of psychological warfare, taunting authorities and the public alike by sending letters to both law enforcement and media outlets, providing gruesomely detailed accounts of his crimes, openly mocking law enforcement's inability to apprehend him, further fueling the atmosphere of fear and uncertainty that pervaded the community. His arrogance and inflated sense of self-importance ultimately led him to leave behind clues, seemingly insignificant details, that would ultimately prove to be his undoing, paving the path for his eventual capture. Following a period of dormancy, a chilling silence that lasted for over a decade after 1991, Rader's insatiable ego resurfaced in 2004. His arrogance led him to re-emerge from the shadows, reigniting the public's fear by disseminating a new wave of taunting letters to various media outlets, deliberately provoking a renewed sense of panic. This reckless act prompted authorities to dust off the long-dormant BTK investigation files, breathing new life into the pursuit of justice. It was Rader's own hubris, his overweening pride and unwavering belief in his own intellectual superiority, that ultimately sealed his fate. In a stunning display of arrogance, he inquired with law enforcement officials about the traceability of a floppy disk he had sent, operating under the mistaken assumption that the technology was beyond their capabilities. However, much to his detriment, the disk was indeed traced, leading directly to his identification and subsequent apprehension. The seemingly insignificant floppy disk became his undoing. The year 2005 marked a turning point in the BTK case, as Dennis Rader was apprehended and subsequently confessed to the gruesome murders of all 10 victims. He received a sentence commensurate with the gravity of his crimes, being condemned to serve 10 consecutive life sentences, ensuring that he would spend the remainder of his days incarcerated at the El Dorado Correctional Facility. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this case lies in the chilling duality of Rader's life. He successfully maintained a double existence, presenting himself as a seemingly ordinary husband, a devoted father, and a respected member of his church community, while simultaneously concealing a dark and sadistic inner life. This stark contrast between his public persona and his private demons revealed a man consumed by a depraved obsession with control and the infliction of pain and death. A horrifying juxtaposition that shocked those who believed they knew him. On May 25, 1913, a seemingly unremarkable day, Peter Curtin's life took a dark turn. While perpetrating a burglary at a tavern located in Mulheim am Rhein, he encountered a young girl named Christine Klein, an unfortunate victim who would unknowingly cross paths with a monster. In a brutal act of violence, Curtin strangled the young girl and inflicted 2 deep lacerations to her throat, ending her life prematurely, adding a disturbing layer of depravity to his crime. He reportedly experienced sexual gratification at the sound of her blood dripping, a chilling detail that underscores his sadistic nature. This horrific act marked the first in a series of gruesome crimes that would ultimately earn him the chilling moniker of the Dusseldorf Monster, a name forever associated with terror and brutality. Born in 1883 in Mulheim, Curtin's formative years were steeped in a toxic environment of violence and abuse, shaping the trajectory of his life in profoundly disturbing ways. He was raised in impoverished conditions, residing in an overcrowded dwelling with an alcoholic father who subjected his family to routine physical abuse. This pattern of domestic violence created a deeply damaging environment for young Peter. Normalizing aggression and brutality, it comes as little surprise then that, given his traumatic upbringing, Curtin developed a morbid fascination with violence at a young age. By the time he reached adolescence, he was already deeply entrenched in a world of violence and criminality. By his early teens, Curtin had already embarked on a path of criminal activity, engaging in petty theft and acts of cruelty towards animals. His early transgressions foreshadowed the darkness that lay ahead, demonstrating a disturbing disregard for life and a propensity for cruelty. In fact, in a chilling revelation, he later confessed to committing his first murder at the tender age of 9, claiming to have drowned 2 of his childhood playmates. This early exposure to violence, coupled with the traumatic experiences of his childhood, laid the foundation for the sadistic and depraved acts that would define his adulthood, shaping him into the monster he would become. His formative years were a breeding ground for the darkness that would consume him. Curtin's criminal activities escalated significantly throughout the 1920s and into the 1930s. Following a period of incarceration for arson and robbery, crimes that hinted at his escalating depravity, he eventually settled in Dusseldorf, a city that would become synonymous with his reign of terror. It was in Dusseldorf that he would solidify his infamous nickname, forever etching his name in the annals of criminal history. His methods were characterized by their disturbing variety and erratic nature. Reflecting the chaotic nature of his mind, his crimes ranged from sexual assaults, acts of unspeakable violence, to brutal murders, each more horrific than the last. He preyed upon both men and women indiscriminately, targeting victims of both genders with equal savagery. He employed various methods, stabbing, bludgeoning, and strangling his victims to death, leaving a trail of carnage in his wake. In a particularly gruesome ritual, he would often consume the blood of his victims after taking their lives. A horrifying act that further solidified his chilling moniker as the Vampire of Dusseldorf, a name that evoked images of pure evil. Most disturbing of all was the undeniable evidence of his sexual gratification derived from the visceral smell of his victims' blood, a truly horrifying detail that highlighted the depths of his depravity. The seemingly random nature of his attacks, coupled with their sheer brutality, engendered a climate of widespread panic throughout Dusseldorf, as residents lived in constant fear, knowing that they could become his next victim at any moment. The unpredictability of his crimes heightened the sense of terror. What made Curtin even more terrifying, distinguishing him from other criminals, was his insatiable need for attention and the recognition of his heinous deeds. He craved notoriety. He frequently revisited the scenes of his crimes, seemingly unable to resist the urge to relive his gruesome acts. Like many serial killers, he derived a perverse pleasure from taunting law enforcement, engaging in a psychological game of cat and mouse. His sadistic tendencies extended beyond the physical violence he inflicted. He seemed to revel in the terror he instilled in the public, feeding off the fear and uncertainty that gripped the community. Curtin's reign of terror finally came to an end in 1930, when, in a surprising turn of events, he confessed his crimes to his wife, who subsequently turned him over to the authorities. His trial became a media sensation, captivating the nation's attention, as the public struggled to comprehend the unimaginable brutality of his actions. The details of his crimes shocked and horrified the nation. Throughout the legal proceedings, Curtin exhibited a complete lack of remorse, further solidifying his image as a remorseless predator. He spoke openly and frankly about his killings, describing in graphic detail the pleasure he derived from inflicting pain and suffering. In 1931, Peter Curtin received the ultimate punishment for his heinous crimes, a sentence of death. In a final act of chilling grandiosity, his last request before his execution was a testament to his twisted psyche. He expressed a desire to hear the sound of his own blood being shed, a macabre request that underscored the profound depths of his depravity and solidified his place in history as a truly monstrous figure.
My trailer had numerous toys in it of different types, all different fetishes.
The individual known as the Toy Box Killer, David Parker Ray, secured a grim position in American history as one of the most notorious and deeply disturbing criminals, leaving an indelible mark on the nation's collective consciousness. Despite never facing an official conviction for the crime of murder, Ray is widely believed to have subjected numerous women to horrific torture and ultimately taken their lives, carrying out these heinous acts over several decades, spanning from the 1950s until his apprehension by law enforcement in 1999. Born in the year 1939 in the town of Belen, New Mexico, Ray's formative years were characterized by a deeply troubling pattern of abuse and neglect, leaving lasting scars. His father, struggling with alcoholism, was frequently absent from the family home, a sadly common occurrence in such situations. However, when he was present, he exposed young David to disturbing displays of violence, further shaping his troubled psyche. These early experiences undeniably had a profound and damaging impact on Ray's subsequent behavior, contributing to his descent into darkness. As an adult, Ray earned a living as a mechanic, a seemingly ordinary profession that masked the horrors within. Beneath this veneer of normalcy lurked a deeply ingrained obsession with sadism and the perverse desire to exert absolute control over others. Ray resided in Elephant Butte, New Mexico, where he meticulously constructed a sinister chamber he chillingly referred to as his toy box. A soundproofed trailer meticulously equipped with an array of instruments designed for inflicting unimaginable pain and suffering. This gruesome and meticulously planned setup served as the central hub for his depraved criminal activities. Allegations suggest that Ray would abduct women, sometimes enlisting the assistance of accomplices in his twisted endeavors, including his girlfriend, Cindy Hendy, who played a role in his horrific crimes. He would then subject these captive women to unspeakable acts of sexual torture. Utilizing an array of implements such as whips, chains, and pulleys to inflict unimaginable pain, he also employed straps, clamps, leg spreaders, surgical blades, devices capable of delivering electric shocks, and even saws, transforming the toy box into a chamber of horrors, adding a further layer of psychological torment to his crimes. The toy box contained videotapes that Ray would force his victims to watch, graphically detailing and demonstrating the excruciating ordeal they were about to endure. In addition to the physical agony he inflicted, Ray resorted to using drugs to further disorient and control his victims, inducing amnesia in an attempt to cloud their memories of the horrific events they experienced. This calculated tactic is believed to be a contributing factor to the difficulties faced by authorities in definitively confirming the precise number of victims who fell prey to Ray's depravity. Ray himself boasted of having committed numerous murders. However, the remains of his alleged victims have never been recovered, leaving a chilling void in the investigation. Investigators harbor strong suspicions that Ray may have been responsible for the deaths of as many as 60 women, though this figure remains speculative. Due to the frustrating absence of concrete physical evidence, the case that ultimately culminated in Ray's arrest in 1999 commenced when a courageous woman named Cynthia Vigil managed to escape from his clutches, breaking free from the nightmare of his captivity. After enduring 3 harrowing days of brutal captivity within Ray's nightmarish trailer, Vigil summoned the strength and resourcefulness to break free, and her subsequent testimony served as the catalyst for a comprehensive police investigation that gradually unveiled the full, horrifying extent of Ray's sadistic operations, exposing the depths of his depravity. While Ray was ultimately convicted on numerous charges, including abduction and the infliction of sexual torture, he met his demise in 2002 before serving a significant portion of his lengthy 224-year sentence. Cheating justice in a sense, his death left a lingering cloud of unanswered questions, particularly regarding the true, and likely much higher, number of victims who perished at his hands. In 1974, Unterweger committed the heinous act of murdering Margaret Schaefer, a West German national, by strangling her with her own bra, a particularly brutal and intimate method of killing. However, it was only after his eventual release from prison that the true extent of his horrifying crimes would come to light. Born in Austria in 1950, Unterweger's early life was marked by significant instability and disruption. Raised by his grandfather, who struggled with alcoholism, after being abandoned by his mother, Unterweger embarked on a path of petty crime during his youth, a pattern that would escalate to increasingly violent offenses as he grew older. By the time he reached the age of 24, he had been convicted of murdering a woman in 1974 and subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment. He was condemned to spend the rest of his natural life behind bars. It was during his incarceration that Unterweger unexpectedly discovered a latent talent for writing, a surprising development in his otherwise bleak existence. He immersed himself in creative expression, producing short stories, plays, and even an autobiography poignantly titled Purgatory, a work that delved into the depths of his troubled upbringing and his purported journey toward personal redemption. His unexpected literary achievements garnered significant attention from Austria's intellectual elite, many of whom became increasingly vocal in advocating for his release from prison. They held a firm belief that his artistic accomplishments served as compelling evidence of genuine rehabilitation, a transformation of character that warranted a second chance in society. In a stunning turn of events that shocked many, Unterweger was granted his freedom in 1990 after serving a mere 15 years of his life sentence. He quickly became a media sensation, making frequent appearances on talk shows, and readily granting interviews, skillfully crafting an image of himself as a powerful symbol of personal reform and the possibility of redemption. He even secured employment as a journalist, authoring articles that focused on crime and prostitution, a grimly ironic twist considering his true nature, as this provided him with an ideal cover for his sinister double life. Allowing him to move undetected among his unsuspecting victims, Unbeknownst to the public, Unterweger had not undergone any genuine reformation. His dark impulses remained unchecked. Upon his release, a series of disturbing incidents began to unfold as women in Austria, Germany, and subsequently in the United States, were found deceased under suspicious circumstances. The victims of these heinous crimes were predominantly female, and the perpetrators' modus operandi involved utilizing the victims' own undergarments, specifically their bras, as instruments of strangulation. This chillingly mirrored a murder he had committed decades prior, establishing a disturbing pattern of violence. In a macabre twist, Jack Unterweger, while employed as a journalist covering murders for Austrian news outlets, was, in fact, perpetrating the very crimes he was reporting on, creating a disturbing paradox. As suspicions intensified, law enforcement authorities initiated a comprehensive investigation into the matter. In 1992, Unterweger fled to the United States, where he continued his spree of violent acts, specifically targeting and preying upon women in Los Angeles. It was not long before international law enforcement agencies apprehended him, bringing his reign of terror to an end. The arrest took place in Miami, Florida, a significant development in the case. During the subsequent legal proceedings in Austria, Unterweger faced charges related to 11 counts of murder, although authorities harbored suspicions that he may have been responsible for a greater number of victims. The evidence presented against him was overwhelmingly incriminating. Fibers matching his clothing were discovered on the bodies of the deceased, linking him directly to the crimes. Furthermore, his travel records corroborated the timelines of the murders, solidifying the case against him. In 1994, a jury found him guilty, resulting in a sentence of life imprisonment without any possibility of parole. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, the story does not conclude there. Mere hours after receiving his life sentence, Jack Unterweger ended his own life inside his prison cell, employing the same method he had used to murder his victims: strangulation with a makeshift noose fashioned from his own clothing. On December 22, 1978, Andrei Chikatilo lured a young girl named Yelena Zakotnova to a dilapidated, secluded hut that he had discreetly acquired. In a failed attempt to sexually assault her, he resorted to strangulation and inflicted 3 stab wounds to her abdomen. He was apparently impotent and could only achieve sexual gratification through stabbing. This marked the initial act in a series of 56 murders to which he eventually confessed, earning him the chilling moniker, the Butcher of Rostov. Born in 1936 in a rural Ukrainian village, his formative years were marked by the pervasive famine and oppressive Stalinist regime. His childhood was deeply affected by poverty, constant hunger, and the psychological trauma of rumors alleging his brother's abduction and cannibalization by desperate, starving neighbors. This horrific story potentially had a profound and lasting impact on his psychological development. As a child, he exhibited traits of shyness, social withdrawal, and academic difficulties, all of which could have contributed to his later criminal behavior. Following a short-lived and unremarkable stint as a teacher, during which he faced accusations of inappropriate conduct with students, Chikatilo secured employment as a supply clerk, a position that necessitated frequent travel. It was during this time, in the late 1970s, that his murderous rampage commenced. His victims were primarily women and children whom he would lure into secluded areas under false pretenses, often promising food or monetary rewards. Once isolated, he would subject them to brutal assaults, horrific mutilation, and ultimately, death. His methods of torture were characterized by exceptional brutality, frequently involving sexual mutilation. His victims were typically either stabbed repeatedly or strangled. For an extended period, Soviet authorities remained perplexed by these unsolved murders. The government's tight control over information, and its refusal to acknowledge societal issues, such as the existence of serial killers, significantly hampered the investigative process. Chikatilo's ability to seamlessly blend into society as an unassuming family man and his status as a member of the Communist Party further enabled him to evade detection for a considerable length of time. His apprehension in 1984 resulted in a brief period of incarceration, however. Due to insufficient evidence, he was subsequently released, and the killings resumed. Chikatilo claimed at least 50 more victims before he was finally apprehended. The crucial breakthrough in the case occurred in 1990 when law enforcement, finally recognizing the pattern of the murders, arrested Chikatilo after observing his suspicious behavior in a public park. A thorough and meticulous investigation uncovered the full scope of his heinous crimes. Chikatilo confessed to a staggering 56 murders, though he was ultimately convicted of 52. His trial in 1992 captivated the media and the public's attention, with Chikatilo frequently exhibiting erratic behavior and attempting to plead insanity as a defense strategy. However, the court found him guilty and imposed the death penalty in 1994. He was executed by a single gunshot to the back of the head, bringing a definitive end to the life of one of the most notorious figures in Russian criminal history.
Why on earth would you have hurt those people? Why did you kill those people?
No comments.
Across the nation, particularly in the United States, the name Richard Ramirez resonates with a chilling familiarity. Most Americans have either direct knowledge of or have at least heard of the infamous Richard Ramirez. More widely recognized by the sinister moniker, the Night Stalker, Ramirez holds a grim distinction as arguably one of the most notorious serial killers in the annals of American crime history. His reign of terror gripped the state of California throughout the 1980s, leaving a trail of fear and devastation. More specifically, his reign of terror was primarily concentrated in the metropolitan areas of Los Angeles and San Francisco. Born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, Richard Ramirez's early life was marked by significant hardship and instability. It's not difficult to surmise that Ramirez endured a deeply troubled childhood, fraught with challenges and adversity. His father was known for his abusive behavior, subjecting young Richard to physical and emotional harm. From a tender age, he was exposed to a pervasive atmosphere of violence and aggression, profoundly shaping his development. This exposure to violence was further exacerbated by the influence of his older cousin, Mike, a veteran of the Vietnam War, who played a significant role in shaping Richard's worldview. Mike would often recount his own harrowing experiences in the war, glorifying brutal acts of violence and desensitizing young Richard to its horrors. In a particularly traumatic incident, Mike committed the heinous act of murdering his wife in the presence of a teenage Richard, forever solidifying a dark and twisted perspective on life in the young boy's impressionable mind. As Ramirez transitioned into adulthood, he succumbed to the grip of drug addiction, leading him to abandon his education and drop out of high school. He subsequently embarked on a path of criminal activity, engaging in petty theft and burglaries to support his habit. During this period, Ramirez developed a profound fascination with Satanism, a dark obsession that would later become a chilling hallmark of his gruesome crimes. In the year 1984, Ramirez's reign of terror commenced with the tragic murder of a young girl in San Francisco. Although this initial crime would not be definitively linked to him until a much later point in the investigation. Relocating to Los Angeles, Ramirez significantly escalated the frequency and brutality of his attacks, targeting victims seemingly at random, spreading fear and uncertainty throughout the city. The nature of his crimes was truly horrific, shocking the conscience of the community. His depraved acts involved a combination of burglary, rape, and murder, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. Adding to the terror, Ramirez's unpredictability made him even more elusive and dangerous. His victims encompassed both men and women, spanning a wide range of ages and backgrounds, making it nearly impossible to discern a pattern. Under the cover of darkness, he would invade the sanctity of people's homes, earning him the chilling nickname, the Night Stalker. His method of entry often involved exploiting unlocked windows and doors, highlighting the vulnerability of his victims. Ramirez's attacks were characterized by extreme brutality and savagery. Many of his victims endured unspeakable torture and torment before ultimately being killed. Drawing upon his former experience as a teacher, he would resort to punching, pistol whipping, and strangling his victims, sometimes employing his bare hands to inflict unimaginable pain and suffering. In one particularly gruesome instance, he utilized a ligature to strangle a victim. In another case, he stomped a victim to death as she lay sleeping, and subjected another to unspeakable torture by electrocuting her with live electrical wires. At the scenes of some of his crimes, Ramirez deliberately left behind pentagrams and other satanic symbols, further fueling public anxiety and terror. These chilling displays served to solidify his reputation as a sadistic predator. Driven by dark and malevolent forces, the extensive media coverage surrounding the Night Stalker case ignited widespread panic and fear throughout California. Law enforcement agencies were under tremendous pressure to apprehend the elusive killer and bring an end to his reign of terror. Ramirez's reign of terror extended for over a year, spanning from 1984 to 1985, keeping the community in a state of constant fear. Finally, a crucial break in the case emerged, when a stolen vehicle connected to one of the murders was discovered by authorities. From this vehicle, investigators were able to lift fingerprints, providing a vital clue. Soon after, Ramirez's mugshot was widely circulated across news outlets, alerting the public to his appearance. On August 31, 1985, a significant turning point occurred, when Ramirez was recognized by a group of vigilant citizens in East Los Angeles. Following a chaotic pursuit, he was apprehended and taken into custody. The public played a pivotal role in bringing to justice one of the nation's most feared and reviled criminals. Throughout his trial, which was marked by numerous dramatic and unsettling moments, Ramirez exhibited a complete lack of remorse for his heinous actions. In fact, he seemed to revel in the notoriety and attention surrounding his case, openly displaying pentagrams drawn on his hands, and uttering disturbing pronouncements, such as, "Hail Satan." In the year 1989, after a lengthy and highly publicized trial, Ramirez was found guilty of 13 counts of murder and a multitude of other offenses, including attempted murder, sexual assault, and burglary. He received the ultimate punishment, a death sentence. However, he remained incarcerated on death row at San Quentin State Prison until his demise in 2013, succumbing to complications arising from B-cell lymphoma. In a disturbing attempt to replicate a car accident he had witnessed in 1961, an accident that resulted in the violent death of a young boy, Anatoly Slivko's perverse fascination with the gruesome event awakened his own dark desires and deviant tendencies. This morbid curiosity, coupled with a twisted psyche, drove Slivko to commit a series of horrific murders, targeting innocent young boys. His actions were driven by a hideous and depraved experiment, ultimately leading him down a path of destruction and unspeakable evil. Born on December 28, 1938, in the remote village of Izberbash, Dagestan, Anatoly Slivko initially presented a facade of normalcy and was well regarded within his community. This outward appearance of respectability masked the darkness that lurked within, a darkness that would eventually erupt in a series of horrific crimes. He ran a youth club for boys and was seen as a mentor, someone who organized hiking trips and other activities to build character. Behind that facade, however, lurked a deeply disturbed individual with dark, violent impulses. Slivko's crime stemmed from a traumatic experience he had as a young man in 1961. He witnessed a car accident with this boy, dressed in a young pioneer uniform, being killed. The incident triggered something within him, creating a bizarre connection between death, actual arousal, and from that point on, Slivko developed a horrifying obsession with reenacting the accident, believing that he could recreate the same feelings through controlled, staged experiments. Using his position as a respected youth leader, Slivko preyed on boys. He'd convince his victims to take part in what he described as experiments to build strength and endurance. At this point, he would begin his gruesome methods by filming the boys in their young pioneer uniforms. He then used ether to make them unconscious, and once they were under, he would put a noose around his own neck, shit the boys down, and fondle them. He then positioned their bodies in provocative ways and masturbated off and onto their shoes. Many of the boys, after losing consciousness, were revived and had no memory of what had happened. Unfortunately, 7 boys never regained consciousness, and Slivko went too far, killed them in the process. In his twisted mind, Slivko believed that he could somehow bring these boys back to life. Through his experiments, after murdering his victims, he would dismember their bodies, sometimes keeping some souvenirs. He documented his actions, meticulously filming the abuse and killings, further solidifying his obsession with control over life and death. Despite the horrific nature of his crimes, Slivko was able to evade detection for years. He was respected in the community, and the trust he had built with the boys' families allowed him to continue without raising suspicion. It wasn't until 1985 that police finally connected the disappearances of several boys to Slivko's youth club. Investigators found damning evidence, including his films, which confirmed the extent of his crimes. Anatoly Slivko was arrested in December 1985 and soon confessed to the murders of 7 boys. His trial was highly publicized, and the grotesque details of his crimes shocked the nation. He was convicted of multiple counts of murder, full assault, and child abuse. and was sentenced to death on September 16, 1989. Slipko was eventually executed by firing squad. Oh Mamma Mia, in a bid to protect her only surviving son and favored child Giuseppe, who was going to go join the Royal Italian Army. In preparation for the Second World War, Leonarda Ciantulli drugged and brutally murdered 3 of her neighbors. To perform a ritual, little did she know that her actions would bring her to a point of no return. In 1894, born in Montella Avellino, Italy, Chantilly's early life was marked by trauma, including a difficult relationship with her mother, whom she believed cursed her. This sense of doom haunted her for much of her life. In 1917, Chantilly married Raphael Pansardi, a union that her mother strongly disapproved of, further fueling her belief that the curse was real. Throughout her life she suffered from numerous personal tragedies, including multiple miscarriages and the deaths of 10 of her children. Out of 17 pregnancies, only 4 children survived, which deeply affected her mental state. She became obsessed with protecting her surviving children, especially her favorite son Giuseppe, who enlisted in the army during World War II. Convinced that she needed to perform human sacrifices to safeguard Giuseppe's life, Chantilly lured 3 women into her house between 1939 and 1940. She promised to help them with personal matters, but instead drugged them with wine and murdered them with an axe. Afterward, in a bizarre twist, she would take their bodies to make soap and tea cakes, in which she distributed to her neighbors. Chantilly's crimes were eventually discovered when the sister of her last victim became suspicious and reported her to the police. During her trial in 1946, she admitted to the murders with chilling details, showing no remorse. Her defense was rooted in the belief that the sacrifices were necessary to save her son. She was given 30 years in prison and 30 years in a criminal asylum, where she died of cerebral apoplexy in 1970. May 26, 1982, a 23-year-old exotic dancer, Sue Luna, met Robert Hansen in a diner parking lot in Anchorage, Alaska, after which Hansen stripped her naked, had her run through the forest to hunt her like an animal, before he eventually killed her. Now that was one of many women Hansen killed while exercising. The one thing he found solace in hunting. Born in 1939 in Esterville, Iowa, Hansen had a difficult upbringing. Believe you me, I mean. He was shy but an awkward child with a stutter and really severe acne, which kind of made him a target for bullying. He didn't get along with his dad and he was socially rejected, which led him to develop a deep resentment, especially toward women. So because life kind of sucked for him, he found solace in hunting, mastering the skills of stalking and killing animals. And after several run-ins with the law for petty crimes, including arson, Hansen would move to Anchorage, Alaska in the late 60s. He got married and appeared to settle down, opening up a bakery, and becoming a well-liked figure in the local community. Oh, but underneath all of that, Hansen harbored dark fantasies of kidnapping, assault and murder. Now in the early 70s and 80s, Hansen preyed on vulnerable women, often tuts and exotic dancers. His method of terror was more psychological, as he would abduct them, then fly them in his private plane to the remote Alaskan wilderness, and hunt them like animals. Hansen's victims suffered unimaginable terror as he stalked and killed them in the vast, isolated landscape. Investigators eventually linked them to at least 17 murders, though many believe the real number could be higher. Hansen's downfall came in 1983, when one of the intended victims escaped and reported him to the police. With her help, along with the mounting evidence and a warrant to search Hansen's property, authorities discovered jewelry and other personal items belonging to the missing women. They also found a map with marked locations where Hansen buried his victims' bodies. In 1984, Robert Hansen was convicted and sentenced to 461 years in prison, without the possibility of parole, and in 2014 he died of natural causes at the age of 75. Even though he was never tagged a serial killer, Alfred Packer's story of capitalizing to survive during the winter has earned him the right to be on this list. In 1842, born in Pennsylvania, Packer had a restless spirit that led him to various trades, including serving in the Union Army during the Civil War. However, his military career was cut short due to epilepsy, leaving him wandering the American West in search of fortune. In 1873, Packer joined a group of prospectors heading into the rugged San Juan Mountains of Colorado, hoping to strike it rich. The group was ill-prepared for the harsh winter conditions that awaited them, and by February 1874 they found themselves stranded and starving in the snow-covered wilderness near Lake City. Desperation kicked in and the group splintered. with Packer and 5 others attempting to find their way to safety. Months later, Packer emerges from the mountains alone. Now what he told local authorities was that he'd been abandoned by the others and barely survived. However, suspicions quickly arose when Packer was found with money and items belonging to the missing men. His shifting accounts of what happened raised more eyebrows, and when the snow thawed, the grisly truth was discovered. The bodies of his 5 companions were found partially butchered. Packer was arrested and initially confessed to cannibalizing the men, but claimed it was in self-defense, saying one of his companions had gone mad and killed the others, forcing Packer to kill him in turn. The details of what truly happened remain murky to this day, but Packer's reputation as a all stuck. After escaping custody, Packer was recaptured in 1883 and stood trial for murder. He was initially convicted and sentenced to death, though this was later reduced to 40 years in prison. Packer maintained that he had only eaten the bodies out of a sheer necessity to survive the brutal winter. Alfred Packer was paroled in 1901 and lived the rest of his life in Colorado, where he died in 1907.